Oh, I guess we're streaming already. Nice. Well, that's cool. Maybe. Hold on a second. I'm confused. And let me just make sure. Okay, yeah, I think we're live. Hi, everyone. I didn't have to like enter my information like I normally do, so that was confusing. But I think we're good. So let me just get things moved around here really quick so that it's convenient and I'm not distracted by other things. Just gotta quit that Spotify and all that, you know, and all my editors that I've got open for all these different projects. Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Excited to start this office hours on this September 10th, 2020. Tomorrow's September 11th. Happy Patriots Day, or is that what it's called? I think that's what it's called. So yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. Does anybody have questions right from the get-go?
Yes, I do.
Great, Jacob. Take it away.
Yeah. So, what's the value of the keys prop in React, and exactly, what is it possibly doing under the hood?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is probably like the biggest thing that is like, I don't know if I'd call it a leaky abstraction, but it's like an unfortunate thing that we have to deal with. And I have a blog post about this actually. So it's understanding React's key prop. And there's the video that I think that your learning club watched when talking about this. But yeah, so like we can, you can play around with this. I'll put a link to this in the Discord. But at a high level, the idea behind the key prop is it allows React to identify a given React element across renders. And so normally that's not a big problem because like if you're writing regular React stuff like here, we're just rendering this stuff. React doesn't need to worry about this because it knows that on every single render, if this element appears in the new JSX, then it knows it's the same one. And if like we had some dynamic content right here, then it just knows, okay, so I'll take that exact same DOM node and I'll just change its inner text, or whatever the case may be. The problem comes in when you're rendering arrays, and that's why you're going to see this this error message about like, hey, you rendered an array. Each element in the array needs to have a unique key prop, because if you were to change the text content of an array, then it doesn't know whether you actually changed the text content of that array or if maybe you removed an entirely new one and put or removed the old one, put a new one in there with different props, or maybe reordered them in some way in that array. So without having without having a key to specifically identify that, oh, this is item 1, and now item 1 is actually now item 2, and item 2 is now item 1. So we just swapped them, so we don't need to like unmount those components and mount new ones in their place. We just switch their order. So without that identifier, React doesn't always behave in the way that you want it to. And this blog post will go into a little bit more depth and do a better job of explaining it with some examples and along with the video too. Yeah, it goes into a lot more depth. Does that sort of help?
So I actually covered quite a bit of that with my answer for the person that I'm kind of asking this for right now as proxy. The confusion came in the fact that they were also trying to learn the create element API, and what they were seeing was when they were passing in kind of like, let's say, multiple items into the create element, what was coming out on the other end was kind of an array of children. And then when when they were passing an array of things for the children, then it was giving them the key error. And I was like, I kind of made the presumption that there's probably inside the create element under the hood, when they get multiple say like strings or numbers or something, they probably just are passing it back to the DOM as an array because it's just the best data structure for that.
Yeah, let me explain that a little bit. That's a great question. So let's see. I'll just make a quick code sandbox to demonstrate this. So let me bump that up a little bit. Here we go. So let's say that you've got an array of items. This is, apple and pear and grape. And then you wanted to render those right here. So you're going to make a div. And then here we could just say items join with a space. Okay. So now we get apple, pear, and grape. We're not going to get a warning for this because these are primitive values, right? So that's no big deal. So then let's try to do a .map and map these to React elements. So here we're going to say map this item to a list item that has an I for the list item, and we'll make this a unordered list. Okay, cool. So now we're actually going to get this warning in our console among all of the millions of other things that Code Sandbox puts in our console when we do stuff like this. Well, we should get a warning. I should never trust Code Sandbox. Honestly, I should just do everything locally. Code Sandbox, as amazing as it is, it doesn't ever do what I want it to. So we're gonna use my React Fundamentals repo instead, and we'll just muck around in this thing. I apologize for the delay. Okay, yes, and I have an update. That's wonderful. Okay, so we'll just close everything. And let me bring this over here. And actually, we'll do a full screen on this, and we'll stick these side by side. Okay, and then we'll just make our changes here in 0.5. All right, and this is the exercise. There we go, bump it on. So now we can do this for realsies. I can have a thing up, and I think that I'll probably just get this all set up before I do my office hours in the future, because I have a feeling that we'll probably always want to have some code to play around with. So, okay, so with this in mind, now I'm going to make my items. I don't have that still open, do I? Let me just grab all of this stuff. And we'll just stick it all right here, right there. Okay. All right, and we'll just export default app. There we go. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to get this warning. This is the warning that we're talking about. This is showing up. And the confusion is, I mean, the solution is pretty easy. We can just say key and then give a unique key. We just, for us, since these are primitive values, we can just map it by the primitive value. And that will work just fine. No problem. But yeah, that's not always going to work. And that's not actually the question. The question was, what about with React create element? So we're going to take this back and we're going to say react.create element. We're going to make a UL. And then we want to have a bunch of children here. So we'll say children. And our children is going to be that array. So we'll say items.map. And then here's my item. And we'll say prettier will fix this, don't worry. React create element li, and then the children for this is going to be the item itself. Okay, so those two things are actually functionally equivalent to what we had before, the JSX. This is the exact same thing. And here we're getting that warning, and we can solve that warning by providing a key prop, and that's going to fix it for us. So we're good so far. So why do I need a key prop here? When actually I can change things a little bit, and I could say right here, get rid of this children, and instead we'll spread those. And hold on a second. Am I missing something? I think I might be missing something. Oh wait, yeah, here we go. So those are our props, and then the rest of those are our children. There we go. Now, this is interesting. So if I provide the children as one of the props, then I'm going to get the warning. But if I just spread the children right here, then I don't get the warning. Now, to be frank, this is actually, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain why this is. Technically, we should probably be getting a warning here because we're going to suffer from the same problems that we would if we were providing things as the children. But this doesn't actually matter all that much because nobody's writing their components this way. Everybody's using JSX, and so having the warning be there when you're using the children prop as like specifically a prop rather than just the additional arguments to React create element. And so, yeah, for that reason, I don't actually care that we're not getting warning, but technically we will still suffer the same pitfalls by not using a key here as we would in here. So anyway, that was like a little bit tangential, and now I'm like starting to lose my train of thought here. Yeah, I've lost it. So what part of this is like super confusing? I feel like it's probably a little bit confusing. I wasn't prepared to go this deep into this. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm glad I can make things difficult for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just think. So let's just take a look at what Babel's doing to this stuff really quick. That might give a little bit more insight into this, or maybe it'll just muddy the waters even further. Well, we'll see. Come on, Babel. There we go. Okay, so if I wanted to rewrite this app as a function component app, and then here, come on, and then here we're going to say ul, whoops, L, there we go. Okay, so apparently Babel doesn't work like my editor does. Maybe I should just write it in my editor and copy it. So here we'll say items.map. Here's my item, and then li with the contents of that item, close that li, and there we go. So this is what Babel does to this. It's going to pass the items.map as the last argument here, because this is the children position. Okay, so let's take away this for just a second. And I'm going to do a div with hello div. Okay, so, or actually let's do a span just to make it a little bit more like, or here, let's do a ul, why not? And we'll have a single list item. Okay. Actually, we'll do a couple list items. We'll do exactly the same thing, apple, pear, and grape. So these two are equivalent. One, we're just like hard coding it ourselves. The other is dynamic. So you'll notice like there are a bunch of comments in here that are, you know, comment pure that's for uglifiers and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting, but not related to what we're talking about. But you'll notice that each one of these create element calls for these LIs is getting added as an additional argument to the React create element call. So we have this null for our props. Here's the UL for our type. And then each additional one is getting added as an additional argument. However, when we follow the other approach of, oh, come on. There we go. If we follow this other approach of using dynamically generating the children here, then that entire thing just gets slapped into the children position. Let's look at one other example that might make this a little bit more clear. If I were to say div with 3 plus 4, then you notice that here we get that, man, I just want this to, there we go. You notice that here we get that 3 plus 4 being inserted into the children position of this function call as well. So there's actually nothing functionally different between, I'm going to make it so we can comment more of this stuff. There's nothing functionally different between all of these, or sorry, let me fix that. Come on. There we go. I need prettier so bad. Okay. Nothing functionally different between the way that Babel treats this one and the way that Babel treats this one. So for the div with this interpolation, it takes that interpolation and sticks it in the children position of our create element call. With the UL, you'll see that it also sticks that interpolation into the children position. So for both of these, it's just going to stick it into that third argument. Whereas for this one, when we have multiple children, it actually technically is doing the same thing. It's just taking that first one, putting it in the first position for the children. That second one is going into the second position, and the third is going into the third. So Babel actually doesn't use the children prop. It actually uses the additional arguments to React create element, which ultimately gets evaluated as the children prop. So let's dive in a little bit deeper onto here, and I'm going to console log that same thing. We'll take a look at what that is doing. Let me just get a little more room for my console here. So here we have our React fragment. That's what we're logging. And if we dive into that, we'll see our children. So we have that first UL, the second UL, and the div. We'll look at the div first. With this div, it has props. There are seven children. That is unexpected. Oh, the 7 is not the length. It's the actual children value is 7. So when you call React create element, it returns this object that has props children, but when Babel compiles it, it doesn't actually pass it as part of the props object that it's passing. So just to clear that up, if we had an ID of div right here, we're going to have an object. That's the second argument here. This is the props position. And then we just have the children as additional arguments here. So we're not specifying children as one of the props, but when React create element is called, it's actually going to return an object that does have 3 plus 4 or 7 as the children position. That's what we're seeing over here is props children of 7. Okay, so React create element takes all of the additional arguments that you pass to it after the props. It lumps that up into children and sticks that into the props object. So let's see what happens when we dynamically generate that children stuff. Now remember, this is compiled exactly the same. It's just sticking that interpolation value into the children's prop argument position. And so then if we look at what ends up happening, is it should be what we expect, right? So we get a React element that has a prop object, and then children is whatever the value of that interpolation is. And so for us, that's an array of 3 React elements. Okay, so it's just going to take this. This is going to be evaluated. That creates 3 React elements thanks to the way that, or to the number of items that we have and what we're returning from our map function. And so now we have this children with array of 3 props and 3 React elements. Now, because children is an array, we get the warning. That's when you get the warning, is when children is an array. So that differs from this first example here, where we're listing them explicitly, just because at the time that React creates this array, it is able to determine that, oh, okay, so they are statically providing me these values. So therefore, I don't need to worry about these things changing order on me or doing anything, because I know that these values are statically provided. Whereas when it's seeing that you're providing an array as the children prop, the children prop is an array. You're not providing additional arguments. You're providing an array as the children. In that case, React infers that, oh, okay, so you are actually generating these values. You are creating this array through a map, most likely. And so because of that, I can't rely on this order being consistent. They can sort it, they can map different things, they can filter things. So I can't rely on that. I need you to tell me what the key is, so that I can track these things over time, like versus one render to the next. And so that's fundamentally, that's the difference. Ultimately, the React elements are identical. Like these two things are exactly the same. Children, array of 3 elements, and this is a children array of 3 elements. They're ultimately exactly the same. The difference is that when you call React create element with with additional arguments as children versus when you call React element with a single child that is an array. Or it doesn't have to necessarily be a single child. You can have multiple children in here. I could say, hello and world, and then now we have multiple children. So if any one of those children is an array, then you're going to get a warning because React infers that you are generating that array. Does that like sort of help answer that?
Yeah, that's 100%. I think where I was trying to go with the explanation and just was not able to get there. It also sounds like where I made that presumption about like React's just going to take those static values and just turn them into the easiest data structure before they send it off. Yeah, no, that's a perfect explanation for that question. I think you nailed all the points.
Cool, good. I wasn't really prepared for the question, so sorry. I apologize for it being a little all over the place, but hopefully people were able to at least make some sense of it. So cool. All right. What other questions do folks have?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. What's up, Andrew?
Awesome. So I actually have two questions, but first, my question is for the Bookshelf app. I noticed that for the API client that you had before, that was like a single utility function, and now you moved it into a hook called use client. I just want to know like your logic behind doing all that.
Yeah. So I did move that. Let me actually, you know what? Let's leave these together. We'll probably come back. I'll just use this one. So just so we're all on the same page, we know what we're talking about. I have this API client utility here. And so or let me go get the hook also. Hooks, use client. Oh, I forgot where that is. Use client.
I think it's in of context.
That would make sense. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Sweet. So we have this use client, and then we have this client function. So before, like months ago, I had I only had this client, and all of the users of the client, which we can find right here. So we had client right here. All the users of the client didn't actually use this hook called use client. They would just directly import the client and then call the client. So the reason for the change is because I wanted to make as I was recording, I got to the authentication piece, and we don't actually authenticate with any provider. But I think that most people should probably be using some sort of client library to do that. And so I decided, okay, well, let's think about the way that we do this. And I implemented my own provider, like my fake auth provider. You can see it right here, auth provider. And this is just using local storage. This is all like completely implementation detail stuff. I never teach you how to build this or anything. I don't recommend people build things this way. This is just like, we're going to pretend that this is Netlify or Firebase or Auth0. Just use this module like it's one of those things. And so because of the fact that I don't encourage people using local storage as a place to store their token, necessarily, and I instead recommend using a third-party client library for authentication. Most, if not all, of those client libraries, well, yeah, just most of those client libraries don't provide you a synchronous way to retrieve the user's token. Okay, and so for that reason, I had to make this token function asynchronous so that you can get that token. And that token is what we use inside of our client right here. And then to take things, well, shoot, there was, yeah, well, there was another thing. Oh yeah, and another thing is if you ever wanted to do server rendering, then you can't rely on a singleton. So you can't just say, okay, we've got a single token for our application, because then you're going to have users making requests with other people's tokens, which is not cool. And so I needed to have the token be provided and handled by this context value. So when we go and log in, or when we get the currently logged in user, that's when we get the token. And so we don't actually know what that token value is without the auth provider giving us that token. And so here we have use auth, which is where we get the user, and then we grab the token from the user. And then this use client simply returns a function that calls the client with that token. Okay, so that way we can make authenticated requests, because otherwise, if you use the client directly, then you have to explicitly pass the auth token. Okay, and I don't want to have to pass the auth token everywhere. That would be a pain in the rear. So that's why use client exists. It's just a mechanism for getting that auth token from the user object that we have from the auth provider. So yeah, that's the biggest thing. It was oh shoot, I should probably make the authentication a little bit more realistic, and so therefore I can't just rely on the client being able to retrieve the token from local storage, because you probably shouldn't store it in local storage. And oh shoot, that means that now I need to retrieve that token from the user object, but I don't want every single one of these requests to try to go get the user object, because that would just be an additional request. And I can't just put that token in some sort of singleton and then just always reference it, because server rendering. And so instead, we're going to make it a part of the auth provider, or a part of the user that we get when we request the user's information within the auth provider. And then the auth provider can provide that. But now I can't use the client without passing the token. And so now I'll just make a use client hook that handles that. All of that stuff, we actually walk through building all of that. And so if it's like a little bit, I'm not sure I understand what's going on, then that's part of Epic React is building all of this stuff. This happens in the authentication exercise.
So a little bit of a question follow-up for that is I saw that you're using query cache in this file.
Yeah.
And I've looked at that API since I was trying to learn React Query a little bit more in depth than just the basic hook they provide you. And that query cache was probably the more complicated APIs that they have, mainly because it's like their core. Do you mind going into that a little bit, like its use cases, how you're leveraging it and whatnot?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. Andrew, did I finish answering your question? Did you have any other follow-ups?
Yeah, so I actually did run into the issue where I use Optional for authentication, and the token, and trying to get back the token was asynchronous, and that I couldn't call the whether Optional has something called like get signed token function to get back the token. I couldn't use that inside the client the old way you did it in the client function, because the way how Optional was doing it was that in order to call get signed token, you have to use you have to get that from a hook that they provided, and as you know, you can't use a hook. You could only use a hook inside a React component, right? So I guess that's the reason why you changed the client to a hook.
Yep, it was just to make it more realistic. So I'm glad that I made that change, so that hopefully that can help you or others who face similar challenges know a good approach to do that. So cool.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. So on the query cache stuff, the query cache is what makes React Query so awesome. It really is the secret sauce to React Query. So the things that I'm using it for, right from the get-go, like the first thing that we do in the app is we render this auth provider, and we have this effect right here that we'll call this bootstrap app data, which calls this bootstrap endpoint on our backend. And that gives us all the data, like the user's information and their list items. And like this is a fairly common practice to just say, hey, the user's booting up, what's all the stuff, like all the data that they're going to need, so I don't have to make like 30 requests to get all the data that I need. And so like I should say this is common in non-GraphQL scenarios. In a real GraphQL environment, you just, all the components say, here's the data I need, and then Apollo or something slurps that up and then makes a single request to get it all, and it's magic and it's awesome. And it's super complicated. But yeah, so this is one situation where I can't, well, technically I could, but yeah, I'm not going to be using the use query for the list items, which we have right here, use list items, right here where we're saying, here's our query key. I'm not going to be using this hook because I'm not actually making this request directly to get all the list items. I'm actually hitting a completely different endpoint that gives me the data that I need. And so once I get that data, I still want to update the query cache so that the next component that says, hey, I want to use the list items, it says, oh, I've actually already got stuff in the cache. So it's all part of an optimization here where we say, hey, go get me all the data that I need. Let's stick that in the cache so that when components mount and need to get that data, they can get it right away and they don't have to make another request. And then actually, on top of that, when you go to like the books search page, for example, in here, and if we go books, here's our hooks for our books hooks. So in here, when you do a search, then you're actually going to, on that search page, you load all of the book information. And that is a completely different query from getting a specific book, but you get all the same data. And so in this case, I actually also have this set query data for book right here where I say query cache, let's set query data for this particular book with that book ID so that when you decide, okay, I'm going to click on this book and go to that book's page, it just goes directly to that book's page. It already has the book's information in the query cache. And so then when we say use book with that ID, we don't need to bother to go get that book's information because we've already got it. We got it on the search page. So the query cache for me is mostly a mechanism for me to say, to perform some optimizations and say, hey, you don't need to bother to go get this. I already got it through some other means. So let me just give it to you now. And then like you definitely want to use the query cache for when the user logs out. And that's why I'm using the query cache in my API client. So if the user, if we get a response status of 401, the user tried to do something that they're not supposed to, then I just clear the cache and log them out and get them out of there. And then in our auth context here, we use this as well. When we log out, we log them out of the auth provider, clear the query cache, and remove all the data so that we re-render the unauthenticated page. So yeah, those are kind of the main things that I use it for.
I want to emphasize that I've had to roll a cache for an enterprise app, and whatever complexity this looks like, React Query has or adds, it is like hundreds of times easier than rolling your own cache system.
Yeah, for real. It really is. I'm so impressed at what Tanner has built. And I'm not surprised. Like he's got some really great libraries. That anything he touches is gold. So it's great. Cool. I noticed somebody is chatting in here in the Zoom chat. Please don't chat there. I wonder if there's a way I can disable that. I much prefer these questions go into the Discord so everybody can see them. So if you could take that to the Discord, that would be great. It looks like you're having issues setting up Jest. Yeah, so you can feel free to ask this if I don't actually answer it. But seriously, like there are two resources for configuring Jest, and that is the docs and testingjavascript.com, where I show you just tons of stuff. I don't show you all that in testing React applications on front-end masters. You don't see as like all of the stuff that you see in here. So this is a better resource there. But yeah, if you have a specific question, you can feel free to share your screen and ask me like live. It's just that nobody can see, like I can't even show, nobody can see this chat window. And so I can't show them your question. So, but if you wanted to like share your screen or something, then that's totally cool. Cool. Any other questions?
Yes, I actually do have a question about the use client function. I was actually looking I was looking into it early this morning, and I'm just wondering, why did he use callback instead of like regular function?
Yeah. So in this case, use client is it returns a function that people are going to be using, right? And it is, I'm not sure, I'll have to look here in just a second, but typically when I make a reusable hook like this, one that's going to be used, I'm not 100% certain in what context it's going to be used. I'm going to use React use callback, because if somebody tries to take the function that they get from me and put it in a dependency array, then their use effect callback will run on every single render. And so we use callback to memoize it so that it only will trigger a rerun if the dependencies here changes, which is the token, which I would want it to rerun if the token changed. So let me just see if there's any situation where I actually take advantage of that. I actually don't think that there is, because yeah, I'm just using it in the list items and in the books. So technically I could be okay removing use callback here, because I'm not passing the client to dependency arrays anywhere. So yeah, so technically I would actually be okay to remove it here, but I'm going to keep it around just because I can't tell in the future whether this is going to be used in a dependency array. And it's actually like, it would make sense to use it in a dependency array. So I'm going to keep it where it is. But that is an insightful question. Does that answer your question, like, at all?
Yeah, no, thanks for answering. Yeah, that was great. I was just wondering why, like, what would happen if we switch it out with the regular function. I was looking throughout the code. Actually, a follow-up question. I'm trying to figure out like the best way to architect the front end application, like whether following a Flux architect or whatever. And it looks like you're using a provider like a React query provider, and using the query cache to access the cache throughout the application. But how, like, what would be the best practice to have like maybe a global store or something throughout the client
Yeah.
application?
Yeah. So as far as managing state, most of your state will probably live within the React Query Cache provider. So like, because most of your state ends up being server cache stuff. So like UI state, server cache, two different things. And if you embrace that fact and just put all of your server cache stuff in React Query, then there's actually not a whole lot left over for you in UI state. So for me, my UI state that's left over is my authentication state. And then I also have like different elements of state, like, is this this thing currently selected, or like whatever state is in the UI but is never persisted, that's your UI state. And there's not a whole lot left. And so for me, I actually am getting by just fine with just the React config provider, or the React Query config provider, the router, and my auth provider.
Okay.
And yeah, so there aren't a whole lot of great use cases for global state once you get past moving everything into a server cache handling library or something like that. And so after everything's in there, then there's not a whole lot left. If you want, or if you do have situations where you're like, oh man, like this UI state is global and just needs, everything needs this UI state. You know, the kind of state where you hit refresh and it's totally gone. That's the kind of state we're talking about. If you have a situation like that, then yeah, maybe bringing in, well, honestly, just React context will do it. But if you have a lot of it, or I don't know, there are some situations, maybe there's a performance impact because there are just so many components connected to it or something. Then you could reach for something like recoil. But yeah, I would say that 90% of apps can get by just putting all of their server cache state into something like React Query, and then doing a couple of context things for the things that they need, just co-locating state. And I do have blog posts about that as well.
So Kent, I just saw that tweet like an hour ago where egghead.io was like, what's your favorite state manager? And of course, this is what you see. You see Kent pop up and go React, and then you see David pop up and go X state. It's just like everybody's just like Tanner's like React Query, you know?
Yeah, I haven't. Are those on a thread of after mine, or are they all separate?
They're all separate. That's the hilarious part. I I also responded. I was just like, my answer is pretty much React. X state if I have complicated state, and then it's really funny. I don't know if you're just like influencing my thinking, but like I was like, also React query with context is going to handle most of the server side state, which is going to be like a majority of your state, and that's just a fact in any like application, but especially at enterprise level ones where everything's coming from an API.
Yep, exactly. Hopefully that answered your question, Mo. I did paste a couple of links to articles and things that might help too.
No, thank you. That was great, actually. I have a situation where I use like WebSockets, and the data is like in real time that gets updated like a chat application. People like can upvote and downvote, things like that. It happens in real time. And I'm wondering where would be like the best place to store like a huge list of questions that updates in real time based on clicks, right?
Yeah. So I think React Query can manage that really well. Like you could, if you were a little bit concerned about performance or something like that, then I would just reach out to his Discord. He's got a really active Discord, tanstack.com. Here we've got, let's see, I think it's just React query.tanstack.com. And there's a link somewhere in here to his Discord. But yeah, join the Discord and just say, hey, here's my situation. I'm thinking React Query might be able to do this. Like, anybody think that is not possible or whatever. But I'm pretty positive that React Query is well suited for that problem.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. And I also pasted another link to a blog post, the when to use memo and use callback. And that kind of talks a little bit more about that first question that you had. So it can go into a little more detail. Cool. It is already 4:43 my time, so we've got 17 minutes. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got another authentication question. So I noticed you store the token inside the auth provider. So if Auth0, they provide their own auth provider called Auth0 provider. And I was wondering how we store this token inside that provider, but I don't have access to that provider.
Yeah. They give you a hook, right, to get access to the user's token?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that basically is what I would do is you don't really need to have this auth provider. Maybe you'd want it for this half of it, where it's like showing different things to the user based on whether the user's logged in or whether we know they're logged in, like while we're waiting for us to get that information. But you wouldn't need to have like anything other than, hey, Auth0, I need you to go log this thing in. And then from there, you can have your use client or whatever it is, however you end up doing this. And the use client would simply use the Auth0 hook to get the token rather than this use auth thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. I'll give that a try. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll just mention one misgiving, I guess, that I have about, or one thing that I would change about the Bookshelf app if I could at this point. It's kind of really difficult to make changes now. But if there was one thing I could change, and I'm mentioning this because it sounds like you're kind of patterning your app based on some of the things that I've done here, which is cool. I think that I would change this client just a little bit so that it has little helper methods on it. So you could say client.get, client.post, client.put, all of the HTTP methods on it, so that you didn't have to provide a method like for put. I think the only situation this would actually really help very much is right here, where we have to specify the method as put. So I think this would look a little bit nicer to say client.put and then just have the data in here rather than having to specify the method. So if you are like copying some of this stuff, then that would be one thing I would change about this at this point. I guess it's something I could probably add at this, yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, to add to your last point, one thing I thought about doing is to create my own auth provider and wrap the auth serial provider with my own custom provider. And just thinking it's probably a bad practice to do that. Is that fair?
No, not necessarily. Like wrapping your third-party dependencies is a pretty common practice. Like you don't want to wrap it. The reason that it's a common practice is in theory, it allows you to swap out implementations without impacting the rest of your code. So it just acts as a little layer for you to make your own API, and then that maps over to the API that this third party created for you. And then if you decide you want to switch providers or something, you can get rid of that, put in a new one, wire things up again, and then you don't have to change the rest of your code. That doesn't always work out super well, because like sometimes the AP or the way that you wrap it is basically like so directly tied to the implementation that switching an implementation, like it's just an entirely different way of doing things. So wrapping things, I don't always wrap everything that I use. But that said, for a situation like this, yeah, like making your own little wrapper provider thing, totally cool. If you see things where you want to change the API to be a little bit nicer for the way that you're developing, or you see that the way that they've exposed things leads to you having to access or repeat yourself in a lot of different places, then making a little abstraction around that so you don't have to do that repetition everywhere. You know, in an effort to just make things a little simpler. It's hard to say without like a specific example, but I wouldn't say like outright that it's a bad or a good practice. It kind of depends.
Yeah, I'm just trying to break the bookshelf app and try different ways to implement things. So yeah, good. Thanks for providing tips.
Yeah, sure. And if like one thing that I was thinking about just yesterday is I think that it'd be really cool for people who go through Epic React to take the bookshelf and fork it and enhance it in different ways. So I'd love to see somebody swap out the fake auth provider for Firebase or for Auth0. And I'd love to see somebody swap out the fake backend with a real backend, like just enhance it in different ways so that people can see, you know, like I made it as realistic as possible while still making it reasonable for people to work on without having like, you know, accounts at different these different providers and whatever else, and you know, Docker images locally, whatever. So I wanted to make it simple to get going and still realistic, but it's still, because it's not actually connected to a third-party provider or implementing its own server, there's just that little like pinch of realism that it's missing. And so I'd love to see any learnings that you have or anybody, that would be awesome. So anyway, cool. Any other questions? Okay, cool. There was actually, oh, King Darrow, you had one?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's not actually much of a question though. It's just something I want to tell you. Remember ages ago when I asked you like how would like migrate an app to Next.js from Router?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so I actually just figured out how to do that. It's not really like a migration though. It's sort of like something that lets you incrementally migrate. Like
Oh, okay.
this is some info that might be helpful to some people. So what I did is I made like a catch-all page that like catches every route and just had that rendered the old like route
Oh,
route on that page, and it just works. Like
yeah.
it'll just like, it won't server render it or anything, but it does allow you to like incrementally migrate it while still having the app work.
Yeah, brilliant. So is that basically like in the next world, is that typically your 404 page?
Yeah, I guess technically, yeah.
That's the use case for that catch-all thing.
Right, yeah.
Cool. Hey, that makes sense.
Yeah, I figured it out when I just realized that every next page is basically its own bubble. I could just client render a component there and it would just
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's cool.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I've never done it. So I like it when people see. This is the cool thing. This is my big secret. When I quit and went full-time as an educator, my biggest fear in leading up to that and afterward my biggest fear was that I would lose touch with reality. That like I'm teaching people how to build apps, but I don't build like products anymore. And so like, how can I claim to be able to teach people that? But what's interesting is I've been getting more and more of the hardest questions that people can't answer themselves, and more exposure to those hard questions. And like, I can sometimes intuit an answer, and I'll always say like, I've never done this, so like, but this is what I would try. But yeah, then I have people like you who will come back, so thank you, and tell me like their experience. And now when somebody asks me that, I can say, well, I've never done this, but somebody else did. And now I just have exposure to honestly more problems and solutions than I did when I was working for PayPal, which has kind of been fun.
Oh, if you ever have to do this oddly specific thing, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
The flip side of that coin, though, is that professor or educator that puts himself in a bubble and doesn't ever try to extend outward from it. You know, I have a lot of people that are junior devs that are coming in that they were taught like on like assembly and like Java 6 or something, and like they don't have any of the modern patterns or anything like that they've learned. I was just their professor.
Yeah, I've definitely had professors who were like that they leave industry and they actually leave industry. So yeah, it's a shame. And that's like why I was so concerned. I just really didn't want to lose touch with things, but so far so good. Things are going okay. So, all right, cool. 8 more minutes. Any other questions or anything?
Well, I mean, since I got you on here, I was thinking, what do you think about like I don't know if I want to call it mentoring, but like a mentoring like program in KCD?
Yeah. So I kind of, I think it's great. It's a great idea. I'm not sure. I'm not very good with mentoring. I kind of made the decision that I'm not going to here, and I don't need to share anymore. I'll turn that off. Kind of made the decision I'm not going to mentor one person. Not directly or intentionally, like no official mentor relationship where I'm like checking in with them every week and like whatever. Instead, I'm going to focus my efforts on doing things that make a big impact on a lot of people. I wouldn't say that either of those decisions is the wrong one. They're just different decisions on how you can provide positive impact on the world. So because of that, I'm not like, I don't know a whole lot about the relationship of a mentor or what makes that successful. I think the idea is good. I kind of see KCD clubs as a avenue into that, or basically that sort of thing where the 10 members of that group or so will mentor each other. And that's what I kind of hope happens naturally, is that just some natural mentorship happens. And honestly, that's where most of my experience and benefit and whatever has come from for me has been in collaborative mentorship of one another.
Okay, follow up idea then, because I agree with that, and we both know how this relationship has gone. So, how about this? How about like advice channels, like career advice, work advice, resume advice, etc.?
I think that's great. We could have a whole channel category for advice, and we can just do, yeah, because we actually have a code review channel that could probably go in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And actually, I think you have the ability to make those channels yourself. So if you want to do that, then feel free to do that. I think that's a great idea. I'd love to provide a space for that type of thing. That's the kind of thing that I want to encourage in our community for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like I've mentioned this on Twitter before, and I think I've mentioned it on a couple of our other talks as well. Is I have a very what do you call that, non-traditional view of mentor mentee as well. Like I've never liked the idea of like, oh, you have to conform to some like this is your mentor, this is the mentee, you have to
Yeah,
meet
some
on these
official
days.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so formal and so structured that like it's too rigid, and most of the time mentees and mentors just lose like that motivation or that connection because they feel like they're being forced into it. So
Mm.
I have a lot of more extreme views on those relationships.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I'd love to have an advice category and put a bunch of advice channels in there. So if you need my help, then let me know. But yeah, I think that'd be great. I just noticed a question here in Discord from Gera. I'm not sure if that's how you say the name. So sorry, or Gera, I'm sorry. But have you got experience with tests failing randomly on CI/CD runners? Do you happen to know any common reasons, or do you have any troubleshooting tips? Okay, this is the worst. I hate this so much. It is so frustrating. So, yeah, as far as like common reasons, sometimes code like functions differently when it's in CI, which is not great. But you can simulate that pretty well by setting the CI variable in your like when you run it locally. Just say CI equals 1 and then npm test, and you can simulate that and see if that fails. Frankly, that doesn't happen to me a whole lot where that actually reveals the problem. Maybe I've sidestepped it enough that now I don't run into it, but that's one thing I have noticed in the past. Another thing, sometimes I've noticed that CI struggles to run my tests in parallel. And so on CI, I often will add the -- run in band flag. And that can fix things. It's super frustrating that that happens. I feel like Jess should just be able to somehow detect that it's on like a lower powered machine. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's why that happens, but that sometimes seems to solve the problem. As far as like troubleshooting, that's the worst. My mechanism for troubleshooting typically involves like commit, push, and like wait that whole time to get it to run. I do not recommend this. What I would suggest instead is most CI environments, most of the modern ones, I think have some mechanism for you to simulate that environment locally, or like get a Docker container or something, so that you can have a faster feedback cycle. So that would be something to look into as well. But yeah, it's the worst.
So
Yeah.
I actually had this very issue recently as well. Sorry to butt in again, but the I ended up doing a lot of work in figuring out like, okay, how does Jest actually run in CI usually? And so like their workers generally default to like this like max amount of CPU length -1 or something. And that doesn't work in some CIs because the Linux box just doesn't like that, especially if you're sometimes running on a Docker image or something, and it's just freaks out because it doesn't know what the resources are.
Hmm.
What I ended up doing was there was one test that was it was timing out before it was finishing, and I literally, this is hacky, this is super hacky, but I did jest.timeout and I increased the time that the test was allowed to run before it would time out. And
I've done this before also. That raise my hand of shame. Like, yeah, I've done this also. So good luck. Mo just asked a great question, so I'm going to share my screen here again to answer this. The question is, how are you importing the auth provider when it's not actually a node module? And you might notice also that I'm doing this all over the place. So here I'm importing the use client from context auth context. That's not a module called context. This isn't a module called assets. So how am I doing this? Well, I love this. This is great. So this is with Create React App, but if I were doing my own Webpack thing or whatever, I always do this because it's just so helpful. I set this up with my tooling, whatever it is. But with JS-config JSON or TS-config JSON, if you're using TypeScript, you can set in the compiler options the base URL. And with that, it will check first for anything that's within that base URL. So it'll, before checking for node modules / whatever, it'll check for source / whatever. And so that's how I make it appear like this is a node module, because it's in the source directory. So unfortunately, my Chrome extension that makes all these links doesn't work with that. But like the testing is all set up to make that work and everything. I'm trying to remember. I think that testing JavaScript shows you how to do this with Jest at least. It's the module paths, module module. Nope. It is, yeah, nope. Yeah, custom module resolution with module directories. So I show you how that works with Webpack. Right. I think yeah. So here's where I show you how that works in the Webpack config. And then I don't actually build it. I like, assuming you have this support, this is how it works there. And then here's how you do that with Jest. Use the module directories. And those are the only two that I really care about. And it works great. It's awesome. And then you add the JS config, and that's what makes your editor happy with that too. So, or at least VS Code. VS Code will be able to autocomplete and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Cool. Okay, we're over time, but I will answer this last question. What do you think here? And since I'm sharing the screen, I'll just move this over if I can. Why can I not do that? Okay, there we go. What do you think about something like suspense, but say the fallback is triggered based on a condition? For example, you want to show the fallback when there's no data on a child's component, and fallback gets triggered in a parent component declaratively instead of imperatively. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that you could do is you could actually use an error boundary and throw an error, like a special kind of error that the error boundary could catch and show, the fallback. I mean, that you could do that. That would be pretty annoying though, because anytime that happened, it would show logs in the console, even though you're catching it and stuff. I would not like that. I don't know of anything else that could do that for you. If you tried to use suspense for that, then the component would suspend indefinitely, and I'm not sure. I think React eventually times out or something. I'm not sure what React would do with an indefinite suspending component. Yeah, it's an interesting problem. I don't think that there's a solution, like a reasonable solution for you. I would recommend bringing this up to the React team and see what they say about that. Interesting idea. If I had this capability right now, I'm not sure I would leverage it. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's interesting. Interesting idea. Cool. All right, that's it for me. Thanks for hanging out. It was a good time. Let me just wrap up with the last couple of things. If you're new here, office hours happens. You go to kentcdallas.com/office hours. Happens every Monday and Thursday at these times. You can add it to your calendar so it's in your time zone. And there's a link to Zoom right here. But if you want to get access to like all of the questions and answers and stuff, the links, then you're going to need to join the Discord. And there's a link to join the Discord right here. Yeah, this will be recorded on YouTube, available at the URL you are at currently. So that's fun. Yeah, I think that's it. That's all I wanted to share. Epic React Dev is coming soon, and I can't wait. You're going to love it. That's it. Thanks, everyone. It was a good time. We'll see y'all later. Bye.